You know the sound. Even if you haven't heard it in years, your brain still has it stored somewhere. That little jingle, the one that plays when Mario finds a green mushroom. It's one of the most instantly recognizable sounds in gaming history. And for an entire generation of players, it triggered something that felt close to relief. Not excitement or celebration, but relief, which is a little strange when you think about it, because all that really happened was a number went up by 1. So why did it feel so good? There's an interesting answer underneath that question, one that has less to do with skill and reward and more to do with a very specific problem the 1-up was designed to solve. A problem, it turns out, that stopped existing a long time ago and eventually took the 1-up with it. So what's the story when it comes to extra lives? Here's what we tend to think. They were generous, they were rewards. You played well, you got more lives. Pretty simple, right? And if you look at how 1-ups worked in something like Super Mario Bros., that story makes sense. You found a hidden block, you collected 100 coins. It was like the game giving you a little something extra for your impressive play. But here's the thing, if extra lives were purely about rewarding skill, why were so many of them placed in obvious locations? Why did some games practically throw them at you? And why, as games evolved, did farming lives become almost passive, less a test of skill and more a byproduct of just playing the game? The reward story is real, but it's not the whole story. There was something else going on underneath it. To understand what the 1-up was actually doing, you have to look at where it came from. And where it came from is pinball. In the 1940s, American state governments started banning pinball machines. They classified them as gambling, which, to be fair, some of them were. To survive, manufacturers had to add something that looked like skill, so they invented the extra ball. Hit the right target, you get to keep playing. It wasn't really a reward for being good, it was a legal workaround. That mechanic carried forward into early arcade video games, where lives were tied to score thresholds. Hit 1,500 points in Space Invaders, get an extra life. Hit 10,000 in Asteroids, same deal. The arcade owner could even adjust those thresholds with a dip switch on the cabinet, tuning how quickly players burn through their lives. Which is worth pausing on for a second, because if extra lives were purely a reward for skill, why would arcade operators need a dial to control how often they happened? The answer points to what the extra life was really for. Arcades had a very specific commercial problem. A cabinet could cost anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000. Operators needed to recoup that, and the faster the better. The way they did it was simple: coins per hour, which meant session length was everything. Too short and players felt robbed and didn't come back. Too long and one player occupied a cabinet for 30 minutes on a single quarter, which was great for that player and terrible for the operator. In 1989, Fukio Mitsuji, a veteran arcade designer at Taito, put it plainly in a column for Gamist magazine. He said, and I quote, "Arcade games always feature rigid, finely targeted difficulty in order to generate customers. That tack is motivated by commercial concerns, but in the case of home games, it's less of a priority because you no longer have to worry about playtime. Among those in the industry, 3 to 5 minutes is commonly understood to be the ideal playtime for an arcade game." End quote. 3 to 5 minutes per coin. That was the target. Everything else, the difficulty curves, the enemy patterns, the live system, was built around hitting that window. And this is where the extra life comes in. Arcade games needed to challenge you. That's what kept the coins flowing. But there was a limit. Push too hard, and frustration could tip into abandonment. The player walks away. No more quarters spent. The extra life was a release valve. It made failure feel temporary rather than terminal. It told the player, "You're not done yet. You still have another chance." And there was a second job, too. And extra life wasn't just emotional relief, it was a tangible extension of what you'd pay for. More bang for your buck, or quarter, I guess. It was a concrete reason to feel like the machine was being fair with you, even as it slowly worked through your pocket. So the extra life was doing two things at once: managing your frustration and justifying your spend. Now, when home consoles arrived, the Lives system came with them. Not because anyone made a deliberate decision, it's just because that's how games worked at the time. The coin slot disappeared, but the one-up stayed, doing the same job for a problem that would slowly disappear. For a while, the one-up still worked. At home, you could still get a game over. Lives still felt like something worth protecting. The one-up still meant something, as long as the number stayed low enough to matter. But games started getting more generous, and once that happened, the cracks started showing. On one end, you had games like the Kirby series. That series became almost notorious for generosity, lives so plentiful that the threat of a game over became pretty much meaningless. HAL Laboratories' design philosophy for Kirby was about accessibility, making games approachable for everyone, which is an admirable goal. But the side effect was a lives counter that had completely lost its original purpose. The number on screen was still there. The stakes it was supposed to represent were not. On the other end, you had Crash Bandicoot. Crash had the opposite problem. The games were hard enough that players routinely stopped before difficult levels, not to get better at them, but to grind out lives. Loop the same stage, collect everything, quit, reload, repeat until you had 99 lives, stockpiling before the hard stuff like a prepper before a storm. Now both directions tell the same story. Whether you had too many lives to care about or were farming them like a resource, the mechanic had stopped doing its original job. The ritual was still there. The reason wasn't. As games moved through the 2000s, the limited lives model quietly faded. Checkpoints replaced game overs. Infinite continues became standard. Eventually, even the game over screen itself started disappearing. In 2017, Nintendo made it official with Mario. Super Mario Odyssey launched with a no live system, no one-up mushrooms, no game over screen at all. Director Kenta Motokura explained it to Game Informer this way, I quote, "We thought about how a live system would work in this kind of a broad, exploration-focused game. In this sort of game, there would be a lot of different restart points. We decided not to use the live system because it was not an element that was absolutely necessary." End quote. Note that last part, not absolutely necessary. That's a polite way of saying, we looked at this thing we've been including for 30 years and asked what it was actually doing, and we didn't have a great answer. But here's what's interesting. The appetite for meaningful death in video games didn't disappear when the lives counter did. Roguelikes and permadeath games came roaring back, and not as a niche curiosity, but as a commercial force. Dead Cells shipped in 2018 and eventually cleared 10 million copies. Hades launched into full release in 2020 and won Game of the Year awards across the industry. These games weren't selling in spite of meaningful game overs, they were selling because of them. What was once the default had to be repackaged as a feature. That tells you something. So next time you hear that jingle, and somewhere in your memory you will, here's what you're actually hearing. You're hearing the echo of a system designed to manage frustration, to keep you at the machine, or at least in the game, to make failure feel survivable just long enough that you'd keep going. It wasn't really generous, it wasn't really a pat on the back, it was smart design solving a specific problem. And when the problem disappeared, when games stopped charging by the life, when checkpoints replaced game overs, when death stopped meaning anything, the one-up had nothing left to do. No, it didn't get retired or go out with a speech. It just quietly became unnecessary and mostly disappeared, the way things do when they've finished the job they were built for. So in the end, we thought we were being rewarded. But in reality, we were being kept from giving up. And for an entire generation of players, that was more than enough. So now I want to ask, what game made lives feel meaningless to you for the first time? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy gaming, my friends.